Welcome back to Renewing the Mind, the weekly audio program where we go deep into the Word, challenge the way we think, and discover what it truly means to lead from the inside out. I'm so glad that you're here today. Whether you're driving, walking, sitting at your desk, or pressing through a season that has been harder than you expected, wherever you are right now, this episode is for you. Today's episode is called Keep an Eternal Perspective. And I want to start by asking you a question that may feel a little uncomfortable for just a moment. Here it is. What are you fixated on right now? Not what are you thinking about casually. I mean, what is consuming your attention? What problem keeps you up at night? What disappointment keeps pulling your eyes downward? What uncertainty has your mind locked in a loop? Because here's what I've observed, both in my own life and in the lives of leaders I've had the privilege of walking alongside. The thing that we fix our eyes on will always determine the direction that we move. And when our eyes are fixed on the wrong thing, even the most gifted, capable, faith filled leader can find themselves paralyzed, bitter, or even burned out. So today we're going to talk about what the Apostle Paul discovered and what he wants us to discover about how to stay grounded and keep moving forward when life is pressing hard against you. And it all comes back to one powerful, transformative principle. Where you fix your eyes determines everything. Let's get into today's anchor verse, and it's found in 2 Corinthians 4:18. And I'm reading from the New Living Translation. Here's what Paul writes, quote, "So we don't look at the troubles we can see now, rather we fix our gaze on things that cannot be seen. For the things we see now will soon be gone, but the things we cannot see will last forever." End quote. That is 2 Corinthians 4:18. I want you to sit with that for just a moment. We fix our gaze on things that cannot be seen. Now, on the surface, that almost sounds like a contradiction, doesn't it? How do you fix your eyes on something that you cannot see? And if you cannot see it, how do you even know that it's there? That's exactly where Paul wants to take us today. To fully appreciate the power of this verse, we need to understand the context that it's actually written in, because Paul was not writing this from a place of comfort. He wasn't sitting in a leather chair sipping on his coffee. He was writing this from the middle of the storm. Earlier in 2 Corinthians 4, Paul describes what his life actually looked like in his ministry. He says that they were pressed on every side by troubles, but not crushed, perplexed, but not driven to despair. They were hunted down, but they were never abandoned. They were knocked down, but they were never destroyed. This is a man who had been beaten with rods, shipwrecked, imprisoned, stoned, and left for dead. He was writing to a church that was watching him suffer and probably wondering, if Paul is going through all of this, is following Jesus really worth it? And Paul's answer is a resounding and unshakable yes. But not because the suffering was not real. He never minimizes it. He never pretends it's not hard. What Paul does is he reframes it. He recontextualizes the suffering by placing it next to something far larger, far more durable, and far more certain. He calls the suffering in verse 17, and I love how the New Living Translation words this. He calls it light in momentary troubles. And when I read that, part of me wants to say, Paul, with respect, beatings and imprisonment do not feel light. But Paul is not being dismissive, he's being comparative. He's actually saying, when you hold your present pain up next to the eternal weight of glory that's coming, the proportion shifts entirely. That is what it means to keep an eternal perspective. Now, Paul begins to draw a very clear distinction in this verse, and I think it's worth pausing on as leaders. because it maps directly onto how we process the world around us. He places everything we experience into two categories. The first category is what can be seen, the visible, tangible, the measurable, the present, the things you can touch, the things you can quantify, the things you can observe with your natural eyes, the report that just came back negative, the team that fell apart, the finances that just don't add up, the relationship that's fractured, the diagnosis, the rejection, the door that just closed. These things are real. Paul does not pretend that they're not, but he assigns them a very specific property. They are temporary. They're already fading, already passing away, already on their way out. The second category is what cannot be seen, the invisible, the spiritual, the eternal, and Paul assigns these a very different property. They last forever. They are not subject to decay. They are not affected by the economy, by the opinions of people, by the shifting of circumstances. They are permanent. And here's the leadership principle I want you to really lock in today. What is most real is not always what is most visible. Let me say that again. What is most real is not always what is most visible. The deepest realities of your life, your calling, your identity in Christ, God's purposes for your life, the eternal fruit of your faithfulness. None of these things can be seen with the naked eye, but they are more real, more durable, and more consequential than anything pressing against you right now. Paul's instruction is not to ignore what you can see. It's to refuse to be governed by it. So let's talk practically. What does it actually look like to fix your gaze on the unseen? Because this is not passive. This is not spiritual escapism. This is one of the most active, disciplined, intentional things you'll ever do as a leader. I think about it this way. When a ship's navigator is out at sea and there's a storm, waves crashing, wind howling, visibility reduced, they don't steer by looking at the waves. If they fix their eyes on the waves will steer the ship. Instead, they fix their eyes on the compass, on the stars when visible, on the instruments that point towards the destination. The storm is real. The waves are real. But the thing that determines direction is what the navigator chooses to look at. As leaders, we are constantly being invited by our circumstances, by our emotions, by the enemy, and honestly, sometimes by well-meaning people around us to fix our gaze on the waves. And when we do that, we lose our bearing. We start making fear-based decisions. We start shrinking back. We start building walls instead of bridges. We start measuring our worth by what's falling apart instead of by what God has declared over us. Fixing your gaze on the eternal means you make a daily, sometimes moment by moment, decision to anchor your perspective in what God says is true rather than what your circumstances are screaming at you. It means opening the word and letting it speak louder than the problem. It means prayer that isn't just a list of requests, but a genuine act of repositioning your heart in the presence of God. It means surrounding yourself with people who will remind you of who you are and where you're going when you've temporarily lost sight of it. Now, let me speak to those of you who are leading people, whether that's in a church, a ministry, a business, your household, or a community. I want to say something that I believe very deeply. Your people will tend to look where you're looking. Leadership is not just about strategy and systems. Leadership profoundly is about sight. Where you direct your attention shapes the culture of everything around you. If you as a leader are fixated on what's going wrong, what's lacking, what's threatening, your team will feel that. It'll seep into the atmosphere. And before long, you've created a culture of scarcity, fear, and reactivity, even if you never intended to. But when you, as a leader, are genuinely anchored in an eternal perspective, when your people can see that you are not rattled by the things that would rattle most people, something powerful happens. They begin to believe that it's actually possible to navigate hard seasons without losing hope. They begin to adopt your perspective. You become a living demonstration that the unseen is more real than the seen. That is prophetic leadership. That is the kind of leadership that Paul modeled. In the middle of chains and shipwrecks, he was writing letters of joy, hope, and vision. He wasn't performing resilience. He had discovered something, that the eternal perspective is not a coping mechanism. It is a transformative lens that changes what you're capable of. I want to challenge you today. Where are you directing the collective gaze of the people you lead? Are you pointing them towards the problem or towards the promise? Are you rehearsing what God has said, or are you rehearsing what the latest bad news is saying? This is not about being unrealistic or dismissing hard truths. It's about making sure that the truth of God gets at least as much airtime as the trouble of the moment. Now, I want to be honest with you about something, because this program is not about giving you a tidy 3-step formula that makes everything easy. Keeping an eternal perspective is a tension to be held, not a problem to be solved. There will be days, and I know that you've had them, where the eternal perspective feels very, very thin, where the verse feels good on paper, but the pain in front of you feels completely overwhelming. When you've prayed and worshiped and read and still feel like the ceiling is low and that all the walls are closing in on you, can I speak to you in that place for a moment? The goal is not to never feel the weight of what is visible. Paul felt the weight. He wrote about it openly. The goal is not to transcend your humanity or become emotionally numb to difficulty. The goal is not to let the visible have the final word, even in your weakest moments, even when the eternal feels far away. You can return to the anchor. You can say out loud if you need to, what I see is temporary, what God has and what God has said is eternal. You may not feel it fully yet, but you're pointing your face in the right direction. And over time, over practice, the discipline of reorientation, it begins to build a kind of spiritual muscle memory that becomes the foundation of a life that does not cave under pressure. This is what it means to renew your mind. You are literally rewiring how you process reality. You're training your inner world to organize itself around what is eternal rather than what is immediate. And that transformation does not happen overnight, but it does happen. It is promised to those who persist in it. So as we close today, I want to give you something to carry with you this week. I want you to identify one specific visible thing, one circumstance, one challenge, one uncertainty that has been dominating your mental and emotional real estate lately. Just one thing. Now I want you to hold it up next to 2 Corinthians 4:18 and ask yourself 2 questions. First, is this thing eternal or is it temporary? And the second, what has God said about this area of my life that I haven't been given enough weight to? Write those answers down, put them somewhere you'll see them this week. And every time that visible thing tries to hijack your attention, bring it back to what God has said, not as a denial of reality, but as a declaration of a higher reality. Because here's the truth. Here's the truth that I want to leave you with today. The things that are pressing against you right now, they have an expiration date. Your calling does not. The fruit of your faithfulness does not. The promises of God over your life do not. and the eternal weight of glory that Paul talks about that is being produced in you right now through the very things that feel the heaviest, that does not expire. It does not fade. It is waiting for you, more real than anything you can touch. Fix your gaze there. Thank you for spending some time with me today on Renewing the Mind. If this episode spoke to you, I'd love to hear from you. And please share it with a leader that's in your life who needs to be reminded that the unseen is more powerful than the seen. And next time, we will continue the series. So make sure that you're subscribed. Make sure you don't miss it. Until then, remember, you are not what your circumstances say you are. You are what God says you are. Keep renewing your mind. Keep fixing that gaze and walk in it this week. This is Revealing His Kingdom, built for eternity, saved by grace through faith. Jesus is King of Kings, and He is Lord of Lords. And I pray that you have an amazingly blessed day today, and that He would rain His perfect peace down on you today. Have a blessed day.